The Tale of Aximal Frog. Aximal Frog was the leader of the pond. He watched over all the creatures, and he helped everybody stay safe and clean in the pond. But it wasn't always this way. When he was a baby, he was just a baby frog, just like any other. His parents, they were not rich. His dad, he worked at the pond. He was the elevator keeper. He took the frogs of the pond from the surface down to the bottom of the pond where they would work. They would work in the bottom of the pond, which was a system of tunnels and machinery that made the pond work. That made all the goods of the pond, it made all the food, it made all the things that the people needed in the pond, that the frogs needed in the pond. And all the creatures. They treated all the other creatures pretty mean. The flies they ate, all the other creatures were just things to collect and make things out of in the pond. And so, after a while, the pond was getting really dirty because of all the debris from all the creatures that were being used. And it was getting pretty nasty. And Aximal Frog, as he grew, he watched the mess that came from the pond, and he thought of a way that he could start filtering out all the bad stuff. And so he devised a system where he would filter out the bad water, and he would let the new water drip in from the rain. And he would filter out all the bad stuff, and he would get it out of the pond, and then the rain would fill the pond back up every time. And it was a really good system. It was cleaning up the pond, and the people really loved it. But who did not love it was King Toad. He said, no, the pond has always been filthy, it's always been scummy, and that's just the way ponds are. You can't clean them up. It just doesn't work. We're losing our resources. All the creatures are starting to go off and think for themselves and do their own thing instead of being tools for us to use. And they said, well, we don't really need all that stuff. We can just think we can use our own resources and get our own things. And he said, no, this is the way the pond has always been, and it's getting too clean. I don't know if I can handle this anymore. And they said, what is going on? Why would he not want it to be clean? And so one day, he came down and he said, okay, this is it. It's gotten too clean. I don't like this. Things are not being made. Everybody's getting lazy. Aximal Frog, you've got to go. You're banished from the pond. And Aximal Frog said, I didn't ever do anything. I just helped clean up. Everybody loves it. You're gone. Leave this kingdom now, or you should be killed. And so he skipped out of the pond and was gone from that day. So he couldn't really leave the pond and go somewhere else. He just had to find a place that was his own. He went to the very far end of the pond where nobody ever went, where the wilderness was and all the flies. And he found himself a nice little cozy place. He had a bubble sphere for watching the news of what was going on, so he could keep an eye on things. He had a microwave oven, which was a electric bug zapper that he found on the porch of the old man. And he had himself a table, which was a leaf, and he had himself a nice refrigerator, which was just an old cooler to keep flies in. And so there he was in his own little personal heaven, just watching the kingdom, just watching the pond, and just being like, man, they're just making it all dirty again. They would watch the news and they would say of all these dirty things that are happening, and all the filth had gone back into the pond, and King Toad was happy. Said, this is the way the kingdom rules. This is the way it goes. This is the kingdom of filth and scum, and that's fine. It's a pond. It's supposed to be that way. And so, Aximal Frog lived there, and then one day, he walked outside, and he was hopping around, and he heard a noise, and he saw a rustle in the bushes. And another frog popped out, and he said, who are you? And she said, I'm Joanna Frog, who are you? He said, I'm Aximal Frog. And she said, oh my gosh, it's him. And she ran away before he could say anything. And he thought to himself, oh man, now I've done it. And she ran off. He knew she was going to tell the king, and they were going to come for him. So he went out, and he devised himself a plan. He said, this is the time. I have to execute it now, or else I'm going to be executed. And so he went, and he snuck around, and his plan was that he was going to go down to the very bottom of the pond. And so he did, and he disappeared. And during this time, King Toad was getting all his men together, all the fighters in the pond, everybody, all the guards. He couldn't make any chances. They were going to capture Aximal Frog and do away with him this time, since he didn't leave. They had to kill him. So they came to his house where the girl showed him, and he was gone. They heard a ribbit, but they were like, where is he? Where is he? And they heard a ribbit, and they came in, and they saw the table, and they said, there he is. And there was a blanket. And they pulled the blanket back, and it was the bubble sphere. And it was just playing the news. Ribbit, 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 ribbit. And they were like, oh my gosh, where is he? And then all of a sudden they felt the ground shake. They felt the water shake, and they said, what's going on? And Aximal Frog was at the bottom of the pond pulling the plug. He knew that there was a plug that would empty the whole pond. And King Toad knew it too. He was the only one that knew about the plug. And he said, no, he didn't. And the water started rushing down, started going down out of the pond. And all the frogs were freaking out. They didn't know what to do. And all of a sudden, the pond was empty. And all the frogs were looking around at each other like, what's next? What do we do? What do we do? What do we do? And King Toad looked up, and he saw the water tower above him. And he said, what's going on? And Aximal Frog was up on the water tower, and he released the switch that started the water flowing from the water tower into the rainwater that collected in the water tower down into the pond. And it started to fill the pond. And all the frogs started hopping around in the water. It was just a couple inches deep in their frog feet. And then all of a sudden it stopped. And they looked up. And what had happened was there was a baseball stuck in the pipe that was letting the water through. Some kids had played baseball a long time before. And they hit the ball up into the water tower. And it got stuck in the pipe. And then all the rainwater from then on that collected in there stayed in there because the ball was stuck. Before, it would just drain through. The water tower was never in use. It would just drain through, and the water would just drip through and drip into the pond. And that was part of the filtration system that Artemis Frog had devised, was that it collected the pollution, and then the rainwater replenished it. But since he wasn't allowed to let that happen, the pond just got scummy. And now it was empty, and he was starting to fill the water. The baseball got stuck, and then the pressure built up behind it, and King Toad looked straight up at the water tower, and the baseball shot straight out and squashed King Toad. Squashed him to death, right in front of all the other frogs, and they all let out the biggest cheer you ever heard. Woo! He did it! And Artemis Frog came down and said, I did not expect that to happen. And everybody's like, well, it did, thanks. And from then on, they said, Hail King Artemis Frog. Aximal Frog. Hail King Aximal Frog. And he arose and he said, you can call me Aximal. That's just fine. And they said, yes, sir. And from then on, he was the leader of the pond, and he kept everything safe and clean. The end.